Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the supply chain planning track. I'm Guido Kaup, leading global marketing for supply chain planning solutions at SAP, and I'm your host for the next two sessions. We will start right now with Oliver Wight and moving to end-to-end supply chain management with IBP coordination. Some might not know it. Oliver Wight is the originator of S&OP and developed it further to the concept of IBP. And SAP is honored to partner with Oliver Wight on supply chain thought leadership and go-to-market activities in Europe. In the upcoming session, we will learn how IBP enhances end-to-end business performance to improve customer service, financial performance, business growth, how IBP helps to manage uncertainty, and about the benefits of end-to-end supply chain visibility. As a speaker, please welcome with me Les Brookes, partner and CEO of Oliver Wight EAME. Les is working with a diverse client base from automotive through to consumer goods companies, and with the leadership teams of General Mills, Nestle, Grundfos, and Pepsi, to just name a few. And with that, over to you, Les.
Hi, thanks very much, Guido. Welcome everybody, and thank you for attending the presentation today. I'm going to bring up the agenda for the presentation, and we're really just going to cover integrated business planning and how the process provides global visibility. We're going to talk to managing end-to-end supply chain networks, and then roles in the process, and then a time for questions. I just wanted to start by helping people. Obviously, there's been lots of great presentations over the day so far that relate to how people are using technology to solve business solution problems, but also how people are developing technology in terms of SAP. In Oliver Wight, we firmly believe that even if you have the best tool like SAP, then the critical elements aren't just the tool, but also it's about the process that you want to achieve, and then people and their behaviors being aligned to delivering that process. So in Oliver Wight, we actually help people develop the process that then gets applied to the tools. And obviously, we work with multiple organizations around the world, people like 3M, people like Zimmer Biomet, multiple others across the world, where they've successfully implemented IBP using the SAP tools and technology. So we're going to talk as much about the process as we are about technology in this part of the presentation. So integrated business planning provides global visibility. So if you think about integrated business planning and the way that people manage business, often you see people managing events, and events tend to be problems that arrived in the short term and could have been understood better if they'd have had better visibility out across an extended horizon. So what I want to talk about is how do you make sure that you have that visibility coming from integrated business planning to be able to understand the future and manage so that you can avoid those events. So when you look at integrated business planning, it's a fairly straightforward process that starts with a product management review, PLM, to look at the latest portfolio compared to strategy going out over 2 to 3 year horizon, or what's relevant to your business. That latest view is integrated to the supply chain group so that the supply chain group can then see the latest shape of the portfolio out over that horizon and what it means to them in terms of resegmentation of supply chain, how they're going to address meeting those new demands as and when they need to be satisfied. Once we have a product management review, we can obviously then look at what that means in terms of the latest demand projections going out over the same 3 year horizon. That allows us then to understand commercially what the impact of the latest portfolio will be on demand generation, both from a volume point of view, a margin and a revenue point of view across the business. And that allows us then to compare that to top-down strategy, business plan, etc. But also importantly, it allows us to then move one single set of numbers across to the supply chain team, who can then evaluate what's required to achieve that plan. Not only can they look at what's required to achieve that plan, but they can also look at supply chain performance to strategy and business plan in terms of COGS, other performance improvements that are required to be delivered over the 3 years. That allows people then, from a leadership point of view, to reconcile the latest consolidated plans and also understand any gaps and issues that need to be dealt with by the leadership team. So that is the process, and really what we want to do is make sure we can gain global visibility. So to gain global visibility, we need to be thinking about how to apply that simple oval model of product demand supply, MBR, to our complex matrix structures. So most organizations now are global. There is a move more towards centralized supply chain and what that means. And also, you know, if P&Ls exist at business unit levels, then profit and loss ownership will drive a management business review by a region or by business unit that needs to aggregate back to the corporate view so that we can look at a corporate view of performance. So it's important that when you design your IBP process and you want to connect that to the technology, that we understand the ownership throughout the matrix and who's driving what. When we look at supply chain in this example, we're looking at the nodes of the supply chain in terms of future capability. So not just our own manufacturing assets, but the distribution, the logistics, inbound, outbound, critical suppliers. And what we're looking to say is, what is your demonstrated performance over the future horizon, so that when we then come to create the end-to-end supply chain plan, we can create a plan using those demonstrated performances of the nodes to understand if we can achieve the latest views that the business required, including cost out as well as then the demand plans. So it's important that you design the process to fit your business and fit the flows and the ownership you want to achieve. In this particular model, there is a business unit end-to-end supply review that follows and feeds into an end-to-end supply chain review that's managed globally. So it's important that to get best visibility with the right decision making, you shape the IBP process to fit your business. So IBP process needs to be used by all executives to oversee the business, and it's an aggregate planning process. So the concept of roughly right versus precisely wrong to manage the end-to-end interaction says that we really want to look at managing an end-to-end supply chain segment at the IBP process level to understand the performance of the supply chain segment, and if we're going to deliver the key customer requirements around service, cost, etc. Now, we can do that at that roughly right level, and then as we drop down into execution, we can detail the plans inside the cumulative lead time to generate more of a detailed view and balance the plan. It's important that we're looking at the end-to-end supply chain so that when we set the plan, it's an achievable plan, not only from a capacity point of view, but from an efficiency, service and cost point of view. What is critical is that you understand the right business horizon to address decision making across the horizon of the plan. Often, organisations move past the point where they would have been effective in making decisions, and hence they end up needing to manage an issue inside the timeline where they should have effectively already made a decision. So it's really important that when we design the process, we design the relevant horizon to drive the right decision making. So if we want to look at things like new hubs for networks, then if we're reshaping the portfolio to different geographies, different customers, different products in the next 3 years, then what would that mean in terms of new locations of hubs? Bearing in mind that if you want the best locations in your matrix, then you need to make decisions soon enough to find those locations because of the lack of spare capacity in distribution and warehousing. Also, we might want to look at new facilities, suppliers, and yours. So, typically those things have a longer horizon, and leaders want quality time to make the right decision prior to actually making the investment. If we then look up again, then when we hit the 24-month horizon, we really want to be able to start looking at the budget year. So not just this year, but the following year, to start driving out any gaps that will need to be shut before we actually get to the point of cutting the budget. Look at things like line extensions that may not take as much time to implement. Look at things around inventory projections and where we're going to land. So then again, another set of key decisions as we move from one horizon to the next horizon. And then as we move more towards the cumulative lead time of the supply chain, we're doing more constraint management, disaggregating the plan and smoothing across the end-to-end supply chain. In the processes that we've helped people design, where people are using S4, we've come to a model that allows us to look at the critical constraints across the whole of the end-to-end supply chain, so that when we create that supply chain plan at 36 months, we're balancing the resource. If we don't have enough resource, we can increase. We're then looking to understand the financial implications of that plan as we move closer in time. And then obviously against the balance constraints, we're then looking to execute the end-to-end supply chain. Once we get to execution, then clearly, people with their local ERPs can manage execution against the plan that's governed by the core driving business at that central level. So it's critical, that we understand those decision points in our business and we align our process to the key decision requirements. It's also really important that we understand that there will be a level of uncertainty. So within business, yes, there's likely to be the most likely outcome, but not just driven by the pandemic, not just driven by other events. There's likely to always be an upside opportunity. We may end up selling more of this product if this happens. And there could also be vulnerabilities, timing of new product introduction, bringing on new resource, etc. So it's important that we have a most likely outcome, but we also evaluate upside opportunities through scenarios, and we look to defend the downside vulnerabilities so that we can drive optimized outcomes. I don't believe there is such thing as one plan. There may be one set of numbers driving to one outcome, but clearly there will always be opportunities and vulnerabilities that surround the plan. And it's important that business has a process to bring forward those opportunities for evaluation so that we can eliminate surprises and actually manage some of that uncertainty. That leads us to the need for scenarios to drive decisions and options and the impact of those. Clearly, in integrated business planning, we're looking to continuously optimize the business in pursuit of strategy, in pursuit of satisfying the customer and our own goals. So it's important that as and when things change across that end-to-end supply chain, that we're also looking to re-achieve the optimized condition so that we can share those scenarios with leadership and drive a decision-making process that re-optimizes and coordinates the end-to-end supply chain activity. Again, this activity here where we're running these scenarios will predominantly be against the plan that we're creating outside of the cumulative lead time, whilst obviously there will be some need to re-optimize in the short term. So it's again important that we understand what scenarios and what optimization we need to run across that model to ensure that we're driving to the right shared outcomes. Integrated business planning is about identifying and managing gaps into the future horizon. So whether the gap is in the portfolio, whether it's the gap is, complexity is increasing, what we want to do is use our radar to look at the future, understand the latest outcomes across that future plan, and manage the gaps. That management of those changes allows us then to look at those alternative scenarios and any gaps that exist top down from strategy and business plan versus the latest bottom up view, so that we can give executives the required decisions, and the IBP process can be the decision-making process for the business. Now, in this context, obviously, we're talking about realigning the supply chain to the latest outcomes. But when you think about this, the inputs across that supply chain are coming from change within the supply chain models, change to do with capability, but then also change being driven through change in strategic direction around the portfolio, geographies from a commercial point of view, and then the overall demand generation. So it's really, really important that the quality of those inputs are then driving the decision making around the supply chain, so that we can gain that aligned view of any gaps, and we can understand what it takes to close those gaps. And in our experience, the process of IBP only really starts to work with leadership when they're presented with the required decisions. If it's just a process where we're going through data, then actually leadership often get disengaged and move away from the process. So if we want this to be a leadership process owned by the CEO, we have to be thinking strategic. We have to move away from detail to see the bigger picture and understand the gaps. So in terms of integration, takeouts and visibility, it's critical to ensure that IBP matrix aligns to the business needs, provides visibility across the decision-making horizon, runs scenarios based on opportunities and vulnerabilities and not just the most likely outcome, identifies gaps in supply chain strategy and actions then required to resolve them, and drives for continuous optimization so that we're always in pursuit of the optimized state for the business and the supply chain and its partners. So if we move forward to achieve an end-to-end supply chain planning process, it's important that we engage all partners. So as we move forward, it's more and more important that what we actually do is plan the end-to-end supply chain. And to do that, as per the model that I showed earlier, many organizations are moving to a global supply chain review where they've set out what the key decision making is at the global level. And then by running planning hubs or control towers, they're pulling together the latest scenarios and understanding what that means in terms of the optimized plans. They're doing that, as I said, outside of the cumulative lead time and at the aggregate level before they're breaking it down then to meet the matrix requirements. So that could be business units, could be regions as per this, before it then also looks at where we are around the capability of the nodes. So it's important that at the global level and down to the planning level, we are taking an aggregate critical resource master planning approach that looks at what do we need to do to achieve the latest plans and the latest changes. That means that in doing that, we are addressing the needs of the supply chain strategy, we're integrating, and we're creating the plan at the next level down. Once we move into deployment, we're more looking at the capacity, the schedule, and the execution of that plan across the nodes of the supply chain. So again, it's important that we're able to move from aggregate down to execution and then final alignment of the plan. It's important that when we create the plan is against the demonstrated performance of the nodes of the supply chain at the aggregate level, right? So back to the concept of balance the critical resources across the end-to-end supply chain, and then make sure that we have high performance execution once we come inside the cumulative lead time. So again, what's important is we design the process to be at the right level of aggregation to reflect the right supply chain segmentation. It's important that we have a supply point capability review to make sure that our partners across the end-to-end supply chain, including the operations that we own, are actually looking to understand their demonstrated performance on those critical resources, any future constraints that they need to make the supply chain team aware of, so that they're feeding us with the latest capability, the latest sets of improvements, the latest performance that they expect to deliver. Once we move up, then we're again moving to more of a regional operations review, where we're looking at the balance of that for our regions. And then finally to that global end-to-end supply chain review, where we're making global decisions around the outcome. So global decisions around the inventory investment across the 24 to 36 month plan, global decisions around where to invest in capacity, where to look to take on board new suppliers, new networks, etc. So it's important in the model that everybody understands their decision-making rights. And then finally, it's important that we have an integration point between the end-to-end supply chain review and then how that work will be distributed across the regional network. Sorry, just bear with me. So IBP looks at the critical resource planners between months 36 and month 6. So in your organization structure, you need people that will manage the end-to-end supply chain and the critical resources across the supply chain for the various segmentations. Then we need planners that can manage the end-to-end planning really from the short-term execution out to month 6, so that as we come inside the execution, the cumulative lead time, we're smoothing and balancing and dealing with any final allocations. And then in execution, we'll have operational planners, whether they're at the supplier, whether they're at distribution, whether they're at your own manufacturing facilities that are using their existing ERPs to perform the execution. And obviously, this still requires a lot of human behavior around working in the systems, making sure that if plans can't be achieved, that people are communicating, and then systems are realigning to look at the latest outcome and the impact of that change. So it's still really important here that there's great communication between the teams of people, albeit, you know, the activities are all being managed in the system. What's also really important is that in business, it's important that we use integrated business planning to engage our teams and our supply chains to achieve that strategic performance outcome. So it's important that we set out what we believe are the key metrics for the end-to-end supply chain, so that through the process, we're able to engage from the top through to the bottom and the bottom back through the top. And what we're really looking for is a coordinated group of people where they're looking for the three biggest issues, the three best solutions, and by when they'll implement the improvement. Because if we can get everybody throughout the organization to be thinking, what are the three biggest issues? What are the three best solutions? By when will I implement them? Then that hierarchy really drives engagement in performance to actually deliver the strategic goals of the business. And instead of being a performance indicator of red, green, and amber, we're actually projecting improvement over time versus just gazing at red, green, and amber and having a discussion. So it's important that we also use this process to engage in high performance and align people to being proactive about managing the future performance versus reactive against the past. Now, of course, you know, we can be really supported, and I think we've seen some great examples, including some great development opportunities that SAP are working on, that means that we can enhance the outcome beyond the human eye. And I like to think, you know, that the human eye can take us to levels of performance around 95% plus. But actually, if we really want to drive beyond that and truly enhance the predictability and the visibility of business, then moving into the world of analytics, you know, with AI, with more robotic learning, modeling and optimization, can take us beyond what the human eye can see and to the next level of performance. So when the team at SAP are talking about what they're driving around the future, the benefit of that will take us to another level of cost saving across that end-to-end supply chain, providing we've understood what it is we want to achieve in the first place from going beyond the traditional to the next level. So it's really critical, you know, that we engage with systems once we understand the process that we want to deliver and the improvements we're looking to achieve. So in terms of the next level, managing and aligning the end-to-end, so it's critical to align the long-term plan across all the nodes, across and outside of the supply chain cumulative lead time. We're trying to make sure we deal with the problems before the problem exists and move away from managing events to managing future issues before they become events. We need to ensure that roles are understood and transitions between timeframes and roles are managed. Everyone needs to work in the system. Whilst Bill Gates and Microsoft designed a great system, Excel is not a business management system. Tools around the world like SAP are designed to achieve the best outcome, but you can only achieve the best outcome if everybody works in the system. leadership across the nodes needs to strive for high performance to drive out cost of variation. And then aggregate for IBP decision making and detail for end-to-end and operation planners. So recognize this concept of roughly right, see the big issues, deal with the big issues before you move everything into detail. Right? There's a right time for detail, but that's in time inside the execution window, where actually what we're really trying to do is deal with the big issues outside of the cumulative. And then absolutely, let's make sure the systems are aligned to achieve that future vision of the process to deliver the benefit that we all know can be achieved if we're focused on the process, the right behaviors, and then the best use of the system. So again, I'd like to leave you with those thoughts there, that design the process, create the right behaviors, and then implement the system to drive to the excellence that you and as an organization are trying to achieve. So thank you for listening. And obviously at this point, I'll ask if there are any questions, and I'll hand back to Guido to see if there is.
Yes, thank you very much, Les. Let me start with one question. You mentioned what-if scenarios as one task of planners to be really proactive. And can you explore a bit more about how simulation and these what-if capabilities and scenarios can help to specifically in these disruptive times?
Yeah, so in disruptive times, which I guess we've got a period now of disruptive time. We had disruptive times in 2009. So I don't think they're just related to the pandemic, whilst obviously that hasn't helped. But what's really important is that we're able to develop the scenarios, recognizing that disruption means that things will change more often. And we need to understand what the right scenarios are to drive the right outcomes and decision making, even inside the short term. So obviously what we don't want to do is just drive scenarios for the sake of scenarios. So obviously, if I give you one example, working with a pharmaceutical company, then as and when things like number of operations change, then clearly that drives demand up or down for their product. And hence the types of scenarios they're running are around at what pace will hospitals get back to normal surgeries? What's the impact of second and third waves? What's the impact of vaccination on that, so that they can understand the overall impact on their demand, so that they can then run the scenarios in supply chain to best fit what they believe is the latest outcome. So, those types of scenarios we see people running. We're working with an organization that is one of the biggest prepared food companies in Europe. And again, the types of scenarios they're looking at are footfall of people back in the high streets, back going to work, what that means in terms of the type of habits and then the change in consumption. So again, that they can run scenarios to say, what's the upside opportunity or the downside vulnerability if this happens? So it's those types of things.
Thank you very much, Les. And yeah, there are no other questions. So thanks again. And to the audience, I hope I see you all back in about 20 minutes to our last customer case study with Microsoft, who have a really large IBP footprint together with supplier collaboration from Ariba. So looking forward to see you all there. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.